Cape Town, a city framed by mountains and oceans, known the world over for its beauty, but behind the postcard views, another story has been unfolding. A story written in blood on the pavements of the Cape Flats. Between August and September 2025, Cape Town witnessed a surge of gang violence so brutal, so relentless that entire communities were left paralyzed by fear. Children locked indoors before sunset, parents praying their sons wouldn't be recruited, or worse, caught in the crossfire, and every day, new bodies were added to the tally. The war tearing through the city is not new, but in this short window of time, it escalated into something resembling open conflict. And while no single shooting can be officially pinned to any gang just yet, investigators are clear. The violence is tied to long-running turf wars between some of Cape Town's most notorious groups, the Fancy Boys, the Firm, the Nice Times, and the Mongrels. But one gang in particular looms larger than the rest, the Fancy Boys. And their name keeps surfacing in whispers, in surveillance reports, in blood-stained court dockets. This is the story of how August bled into September and how Cape Town fell deeper into a gang war without boundaries. Before we continue, I'd like to thank you for the subs, likes, shares, and comments. It really helps us, a small, self-funded media publication, in our mission to tell South African stories in a meaningful way. In case you did not know, we've launched our audio-only podcast, Crime Central South Africa, and Season 2 of Unsolved Murders Essay on Spotify and other platforms. Check out the links to those in the description and be sure to subscribe to get notified whenever we drop new episodes. Back to the video. Our first stop is Mitchell's Plain, a vast community on the Cape Flats with a reputation that has shifted from vibrant working-class suburb to war zone. Between the 23rd and the 31st of August, Mitchell's Plain recorded more than 50 shootings, 7 shootings a day, 2 bodies collected every single day by forensics. By the end of the week, 26 people dead, 20 critically injured. Residents described the week as nothing less than a siege. In WhatsApp groups, neighbors asked in despair, "What is happening in our neighborhood?" The local watchdog, Fight Against Crime South Africa, raised the alarm, calling for the South African National Defence Force to be deployed as a stabilizing force. Their statement was blunt. Violence in Beacon Valley has increased dramatically. We need order within our communities. Even police successes carried a sinister undertone. In Lentegeur, officers raided a house and discovered an arsenal, 19 firearms, 1,500 rounds of ammunition, 3 gun safes, 26 magazines, even a stun grenade and a silencer. It was a small war chest hidden in cooler boxes allegedly linked to the Fancy Boys, and yet despite these recoveries, the killings didn't slow down. On one Monday alone, 6 people were shot, 1 dead, 5 injured. In Cricket Street, Beacon Valley, gunmen struck twice in one afternoon, shooting 1 person dead, then hitting another before the blood on the pavement had even dried. Mitchell's Plain had become the epicenter of the Cape Flats gang war, but it wasn't the only front line. On a Friday morning, Athlone woke in chaos. Outside the magistrate's court, a man due to appear in an ongoing case was gunned down at point-blank range. 2 others were shot in related incidents nearby. A man and a woman both rushed to hospital. Police recovered a firearm at the scene and the anti-gang unit took over the investigation. It was a chilling statement of intent. The courthouse, meant to represent justice, had itself become a stage for gang executions. For the residents of Athlone, it was another reminder. The reach of gangsterism knows no boundaries, not even the law, but perhaps no moment captured the horror of this gang war more than what happened in Bonteheuwel. On a Friday morning, gunmen stormed into a home on Yellowwood Road and opened fire. Amid the chaos, a bullet struck a 2-month-old baby. His name was Mohsin Isaacs. He died instantly. The community was shattered. A funeral for a baby buried before he could even smile at life. Residents said it was one of the most tragic acts of gang violence Bonteheuwel had ever seen. It later emerged that one of the suspects linked to the case had a long history of gun arrests in 2016, 2019, and multiple times thereafter. Each time, the cases collapsed, dockets incomplete, forensic reports delayed, witnesses absent. Each time, the suspect walked free. And so, nearly a decade later, that same man was free again, free to hold a gun, free to destroy lives, free to be part of the moment that ended the life of baby Mohsin. The violence returned to Mitchell's Plain, this time outside its own courthouse. On the 25th of August, two men aged 24 and 27 were ambushed outside the magistrate's court, just steps away from the police station. Both were allegedly linked to the Fancy Boys. They had just appeared in a double murder case that had been provisionally withdrawn. Gunmen opened fire in broad daylight. One victim was killed instantly, the other shot in the back and rushed to hospital. 4 suspects fled, escaping even after a police officer stationed at the court returned fire. Another message was written in bullets. Courts, police stations, no place was safe from the reach of Cape Town's gang war. The bloodshed wasn't confined to Mitchell's Plain, Athlone or Bonteheuwel. Across the metro, the toll mounted. In Muizenberg, 3 people were killed in an ambush at the Tlakabantu settlement. In Overcome Heights, 4 people were shot dead on Mountain Road. In Lotus River, 5 bodies were discovered on a street corner. In Hout Bay, 6 people were gunned down in what police described as an extortion-related attack. In Bala, 1 man was shot dead in Tagama Crescent. And in Kleinvlei, 3 men were killed while sitting in a yard in Esterrivier. Day after day, neighborhood after neighborhood, Cape Town resembled a map of crime scenes. Residents described the sensation as living in a war zone where the line between civilian and combatant didn't exist. The tragedy of this gang war lies not only in the men gunned down in alleys or outside courts, but in the children whose lives are being erased by stray bullets. Alongside baby Mohsin, other young victims included 11-year-old Esmeen Frank, killed in Kraaifontein while playing with friends. 2 other children were wounded in that same shooting. In Elsa's River, a 14-year-old boy was killed in a backyard attack. 3 others, aged 13, 16, and 63, were injured. For Cape Town's youth, gangsterism is not a headline. It's a daily reality that shapes their childhood in fear and loss. Despite high-profile raids and the presence of the anti-gang unit, confidence in SAPS is at an all-time low. Community leaders say police are fighting blind, operating without proper intelligence networks. Detectives are overwhelmed, forensics arrive late, dockets collapse in court, and each collapse emboldens gangs to keep pulling the trigger. Some, like Ian Cameron of the National Police Committee, argue that more power should be given to the city of Cape Town to investigate gang-related gun crimes and conduct ballistics. Others, like Faxa, want the army deployed in Mitchell's Plain as a stabilizer. But for residents, these are policy debates playing out in the distance. On the ground, the only reality is survival. From Beacon Valley to Bonteheuwel, people describe a life stripped of normality. Children are kept inside after school. Families lock their doors by late afternoon. Streets fall silent before sunset. Our children cannot live like this, one mother told local reporters. Activists say gangsterism thrives in the absence of opportunity. Young people denied jobs, skills, or bursaries end up being fed literally by gang leaders. One activist put it plainly: gang leaders feed our children because they feel neglected. We need to start investing in our children and their futures. By the end of August, Cape Town had endured one of its bloodiest stretch in years. Mitchell's Plain alone saw more than 50 shootings in 7 days. Courthouses became scenes of execution. Babies were killed in their homes. The city was reeling. No single shooting can yet be tied to a particular gang, but intelligence is clear. The Fancy Boys, the Firm, the Night Times, and the Mongrels are at the heart of this escalating turf war. And among them, one group stands out: the Fancy Boys. Their name surfaces in seized arsenals, in daylight court shootings, in the whispers of residents who won't speak on record. Their reputation for aggressive expansion and violent enforcement has made them one of the most feared forces on the Cape Flats. Cape Town's gang story is at heart a story about power, who commands it, who rents it, and who bleeds for it. It's also a story about place, about streets and courts and corners where borders are invisible but real, where the rhythm of day and night is decided by men with radios and pistols who answer to names older than the city's newest highways. In the present moment, as bodies fall across the Cape Flats, 4 names have become shorthand for the conflict: the Fancy Boys, the Firm, the Nice Time Kids, and the Mongrels. Around and between them are the better-known titans of the flats: the Americans, Hard Livings, Sexy Boys, and the prison-based number gangs, each shaping the logic of violence and order in this region. To understand the present, we have to map the architecture: how street gangs and prison gangs interlock, how money moves, how alliances form and fracture, and why particular neighborhoods are tinder dry. Only then does the current war make sense, and only then can we talk clearly and carefully about a group like the Fancy Boys, whom we will profile in full later in this video. For decades, Cape Town's gang world has relied on a 2-level system: Street gangs operating in neighborhoods, controlling drug retail, guarding turf, and running daily extortions. And prison gangs, the number gangs, 26s, 27s, and 28s, whose codes, ranks, and rituals spill out from the cells into the suburbs. The research record is deep here. Analysts like Johnny Steenberg and Andre Standing have shown how the prison system not only disciplines the street, but also provides the methodology and managerial logic that holds sprawling street franchises together. In practice, the numbers cultivate discipline, organize protection, and adjudicate disputes that street soldiers cannot resolve on their own. Within the street layer, gangs vary from large umbrella franchises like the Americans, the Hard Livings, the Sexy Boys, to smaller, tightly knit outfits clustered around charismatic leaders. Some of these smaller crews carry a local identity that survived for generations, others are short-lived and fold under pressure. The most violent are often the ones that can both sell commodity products, stick ice, heroin, woonga, high-margin cannabis, and mandrakes, and collect rents like extortion or protection while maintaining access to guns and intel. Researchers like Guinness and Pinnock have long described how these groups are quote-unquote small, tightly knit, but networked across the city through family, prison ties, and business interests. A shorthand used in police dockets and the press since the late 1900s, imagine Cape Town's Gangland as two corporate poles, the Americans on one side and a quote-unquote British or firm alignment on the other, with the prison's 26s and 27s more closely associated with the Americans' orbit and the 28s more closely associated with the formation called the firm. That shorthand simplifies a reality that is constantly shifting, but it persists because it captures something true about affiliations and supply lines, and because some cases and rates do show the outlines of conglomerates around powerful figures. Here's a look at the big umbrellas and their mythologies. The Americans. The Americans have been described as a corporate body sheltering many smaller units: the ugly Americans, young Americans, spoiled brats, dollar boys, and even historically affiliations with groups like the Sexy Boys in certain contexts. Their identity is anchored in parts of Manenberg, Bontjeville, Bishop Lavers, Heideveld, Elsass River, and beyond, with fingers in Mitchell's Plain and other nodes of the flats. The brand is less of a single command structure and more than a network with varying autonomy across areas, which is why the Americans can fragment and recombine yet survive across decades. Hard Livings. The Hard Livings, associated with the Stachy twins Rashad and Rashid, rose in Manenberg in the 1980s and 1990s and symbolized a gang world where social control, spectacle, and welfare politics intertwined. Handing out cash, paying rent for families, enforcing order while prosecuting a brutal war for control of drug corners. The Stachy saga, from vigilante clashes with Paga to high-profile convictions, is part of Cape Town's folk memory. Their story demonstrates how leadership decapitations can wound a brand, but not necessarily uproot the economic ecosystem that sustains it. Sexy Boys. The Sexy Boys, whose alleged boss, Jerome Donkey Boyson, has survived multiple assassination attempts, are another anchor of the landscape, historically strong in Belleville South, Ballar, and pockets of Hanover Park. The group's endurance shows how gangs diversify portfolios from classic drug corners to racketeering in peripheral markets, and how leadership figures become lightning rods for media narratives, hits, and alliances. Mongrels. The Mongrels are one of Cape Town's oldest gangs, tracing origins to District 6 before apartheid removal scattered communities to the flats. Their history is important for two reasons. First, it links today's conflict to forced removals and the creation of the Cape Flats as a reservoir of poverty. Second, it shows how older gangs develop deep local legitimacy and reputations that can be repurposed in today's extortion economy, including allegations in recent quote-unquote construction mafia cases where sites on the Mongrels or Eurocats boundary were shaken down for monthly ransoms. Nice Time Kids. The Nice Time Kids, immortalized in the cinema verite documentary The Devil's Lair, embody the micropolitics of a local drug crew in an impoverished Cape Flats settlement. That film matters because it opens a window on the family calculus, cash flow, and fear within a small gang's daily operations, and because the Nice Time identity still features in contemporary conflict maps and commentary. The firm and the 28's orbit. In court papers and many media accounts, the firm appears as an umbrella aligned with the 28's underworld, sometimes associated with cases involving Ralph Stanfield and linked to broader networks spanning gun trafficking, drug routes, and protection economies. Rigorous fieldwork cautions that insiders don't always use the firm label, but it persists in policing and legal narratives because it captures a practical reality. A coalition capable of organizing across neighborhoods and sectors with links to extortion markets and high-end contract violence. None of these umbrellas acts alone. What matters is where they touch each other. Hanover Park, Manenberg, Mitchell's Plain, Kailicha's Edge Markets, Grassy Park, Lotus River, Bonteheuwel, Lavender Hill, Ocean View, Hout Bay or Imizamo Yetu, Alsace River, Kraaifontein, Eerste Rivier. Each a node where gangster borders blur with transport routes, informal housing growth, and retail hotspots. The recent violence in Mitchell's Plain, Bonteheuwel, Muizenberg, Overcome Heights, Lotus River, Hout Bay, and Kleinvlei tracks exactly those border conditions. The anti-gang unit was launched in 2018 to strategically disrupt gang networks. In punctuated moments, it has delivered high-value arrests and gun seizures. But violent surges continues, and community monitors argue that without sustained intelligence, case building, and court-ready dockets, visible patrols amount to breathing spaces rather than end games. The Western Cape Gang Monitor underscores this. Unless operations are continual and coordinated, major bursts become temporary setbacks. Calls for City of Cape Town investigators to handle ballistics and gun cases reflect a push for multi-level policing to close the case pipeline. In parallel, flashpoints like Mitchell's Plain have prompted civil groups call for the SNDF deployment, not as a permanent solution, but as a stabilizer when shootings breach a threshold that local police cannot immediately contain. Policymakers caution that soldiers cannot do investigations. At best, they can hold an area while detectives work. The record suggests military deployments buy time. Their success depends on what police units are doing with that time. To outsiders, gangs are about fear. To insiders, they are also about belonging and insurance. Fieldwork across decades shows recurring reasons for entry: protection, income status, and family embeddedness. A teenager may start as a runner carrying parcels, then graduate to lookout, then enforcer. In places with chronic unemployment and thin safety nets, the gang pays immediately, cash today for food today, and that is hard to compete with. Reputation carries its own currency. Names like Mongrels carry historical dread from District 6 days. Brands like Sexy Boys signal access and clout in particular corridors. The Americas evoke scale and reach. The Fancy Boys name has in recent years been mentioned alongside weapon sieges, court-adjacent hits, and street-level crackdowns, feeding a public image of a fast-expanding, force-forward outfit in parts of Mitchell's Plain and adjacent areas. Cape Town's Gangland has always been a theatre of shifting alliances, bloody rivalries, and sudden implosions. The names change, the borders shift, but the rhythm of violence has remained steady for decades. And yet, in the last 3 years, one group has disrupted the equilibrium more aggressively than most. Their name is whispered in court corridors, invoked in police raids, and feared in communities from Mitchell's Plain to Manenberg, from Bonteheuwel to Retreat. They are called the Fancy Boys. To the casual observer, the Fancy Boys were once dismissed as a second-order gang. They were not the hard livings of Manenberg with their mythic Stachy twins. They were not the sprawling Americans, a corporate-like umbrella encompassing dozens of sub-gangs. They were not the Sexy Boys with their charismatic and infamous leaders surviving repeated assassination attempts. And they were not the Mongrels whose roots stretched back to District 6. The Fancy Boys were smaller, newer, often treated as footnotes in a story dominated by bigger names. But in the chaos of Cape Town's underworld, where older gangs splinter and younger recruits grow disillusioned with their bosses, the Fancy Boys spotted an opportunity. And from 2022 onwards, they began an expansion campaign that was as ambitious as it was violent. The year 2022 marked a turning point. Across the Western Cape, gang fragmentation had reached unprecedented levels. Rank-and-file members of established gangs grew restless. They watched their bosses drive luxury cars, live in big houses, and consume the lion's share of profits while they were handed scraps. Foot soldiers risked their lives for meager payouts. Juniors watched seniors collude with rivals and betray their own brothers for survival. Discontent brewed in alleyways and prison courtyards alike. The Fancy Boys capitalized on this discontent. They became the gang that welcomed the disgruntled. They offered defectors a better deal, higher wages, more drugs, permanent weapons, and a sense of value that they claimed their rivals had denied them. Where other gangs hoarded resources at the top, the Fancy Boys distributed more to the bottom. It was not generosity, it was strategy. By treating their lower ranks better than the competition, they positioned themselves as the gang of choice for those eager to defect. And defectors came. From the hard livings, from the 28s, from smaller crews frustrated with neglect, they flowed into the Fancy Boys' ranks, bringing not only manpower but also knowledge of rival supply chains, corners, and weaknesses. The Fancy Boys' expansion has been described as the underworld equivalent of corporate raiding. In the world of legitimate business, a corporate raider identifies a weak company, exploits its vulnerabilities, strips its assets, and incorporates its value into their own empire. The Fancy Boys applied the same logic to gangsterism. They moved into vulnerable territories, sometimes by force, sometimes by coaxing away local members, and sometimes by a combination of both. Instead of exhausting themselves in wars of attrition, the kind of endless gun battles that deplete soldiers, burn through ammunition, and attract police attention, they focused on acquiring new soldiers. Every rival they attacked became a recruitment pool. Every splintered faction was seen as an acquisition target. They turned Cape Town's gang fragmentation into their own valuable resource. This strategy was bolstered by what gang insiders call migratory scout parties. Heavily armed groups of Fancy Boys would deliberately enter rival territory, provoke a skirmish, and test the perimeter. They would measure the rival's response, assess the strength of resistance, and map out the viability of seizing drug selling points. It was calculated, not reckless. They were probing for weaknesses, not wasting bullets. By 2023, these tactics had given them a foothold in multiple areas: Manenberg, West Bank, Woodstock, Bonteheuwel, Haydenveld, Ocean View, Retreat, and key parts of Mitchell's Plain. Their footprint was growing fast, and their name was spreading even faster. But aggressive expansion provokes reaction. By mid-2023, resistance came. Two of Cape Town's most established powers, the Hard Livings and the 28s, joined forces to slow the Fancy Boys' advance. This alliance was unusual. Historically, the Hard Livings and the 28s were not natural partners, yet both had been hurt by the Fancy Boys' tactics. The newcomers had poached their members, undermined their local structures, and encroached on their profitable corners. Alone, neither had been able to stop the bleeding. Together, they attempted to push back. The confrontation played out most visibly in Manenberg and West Bank, where residents found themselves caught in the crossfire. Community members described living as prisoners in their own homes, listening to bullets rain down as rivalries exploded around them. This alliance slowed the Fancy Boys' momentum, but it did not erase it. By early 2024, the Fancy Boys were still expanding, albeit more cautiously. The Fancy Boys' rise teaches us about the mechanics of power in Cape Town's underworld. They were not simply stronger, they were smarter in exploiting the moment. Their playbook can be summarized in three overlapping strategies. First, recruitment through defection. Instead of only pulling in fresh young recruits, they specifically target disaffected members of other gangs. Every soldier who switched sides weakened their rivals and strengthened them. Second, resource distribution. By offering better pay, more drugs, and permanent weapons, they learned from the mistakes of established gangs. They gave soldiers a sense of investment, ensuring loyalty at least in the short term. Third, strategic aggression. Their scout parties' approach marked a departure from traditional gang warfare. Instead of defending static territory and waiting for rivals to invade, they became proactive invaders. They tested borders, pushed into new areas, and turned defensive enemies into reactionary forces. This is why analysts compared them to the Americans of the 1980s and 1990s, another gang that rose to prominence by swallowing up smaller outfits and waging violent campaigns of expansion. The Fancy Boys were not as large or as resourced, but their methods echoed the Americans' empire-building drive. By early 2024, something shifted. The Fancy Boys' campaign slowed. Resistance from the Hard Livings 28's alliance had bloodied their nose. Rival gangs began copying their methods, offering their soldiers more money, better weapons, and improved conditions to reduce the risk of defection. In some ways, the Fancy Boys forced their competitors to evolve. Yet even in the slowdown, the Fancy Boys' rise carried weight. They had already acquired new territories, new soldiers, and new reputations. They had proven that in Cape Town's gangland, rapid expansion was possible even for a so-called second-order gang. The example became a warning that power in the Cape Flats can shift with terrifying speed. For residents, the Fancy Boys' rise has meant more than a new name on the list of feared gangs. It's meant instability. Where the Americans or Hard Livings once held sway, people at least knew who was in charge. They knew who to pay for protection, who to avoid, and which corners to keep their children away from. The arrival of the Fancy Boys disrupted that grim stability. Suddenly, territories were contested again. Battles flared up on streets that had enjoyed fragile truces. In places like Manenberg, residents described constant fear as the Fancy Boys clashed with the Hard Livings. In Mitchell's Plain, their name surfaced in connection with seized weapons caches. and retreat in Ocean View whispers spread of their encroachment and recruitment of locals. For ordinary people, the Fancy Boys expansion meant more shootings, more uncertainty, and more funerals. The Fancy Boys' image today is larger than their actual size. They are still considered second order compared to the giants of Cape Town's underworld. They do not command the same resources, the same international connections, or the same entrenched legitimacy, yet their reputation has outpaced their material base. They are seen as bold, aggressive, and willing to do what older gangs hesitate to risk. They are feared not because they have the deepest pockets, but because they have the least to lose. They are ambitious, unpredictable, and ruthless in their pursuit of growth. That combination makes them dangerous, not just to rival gangs, but to communities and law enforcement caught in the crossfire. What does the rise of the Fancy Boys mean for Cape Town's future? At one level, it reveals the fragility of gangland hierarchies. Established gangs can be challenged by smaller, hungrier groups when fragmentation reaches a breaking point. At another level, it shows how failure in governance, from unemployment to police corruption to firearms leaks from SAP stations, creates fertile ground for ambitious gangs to grow. The Fancy Boys have already changed the rules of Cape Town's underworld. They've forced rival gangs to rethink how they treat their own soldiers. They have shown that expansion can be achieved not just by holding corners, but by poaching people. And they've reminded everyone that in the Cape Flats, power is always provisional. Whether they rise further or collapse under pressure remains to be seen, but their story is now inseparable from the current wave of gang warfare. From Mitchell's Plain's 50 shootings in a week, to daylight assassinations outside courthouses, to babies killed in Bonteheuwel, the Fancy Boys' name is etched into the atmosphere of fear gripping Cape Town. For the residents trapped in this conflict, it matters little whether the Fancy Boys are first order or second order. What matters is that bullets are flying, homes are unsafe, and the ground beneath them is contested by men who see street not as commodities, but as assets in a brutal empire game. And as Cape Town reels under the weight of murders and shootouts, one thing is clear. The Fancy Boys may not yet be the largest gang in the Western Cape, but they are among the most disruptive. And disruption in the fragile ecosystem of Cape Flats gangsterism is enough to plunge entire neighborhoods into chaos. Cape Town's gang war has revealed itself as both immediate crisis and long-standing tragedy. The wave of shootings between August and September underscored how deeply communities remain trapped in the crossfire of gangs that treat neighborhoods as strategic territory. Mitchell's Plain, Athlone, Bonteheuwel, Kleinvlei, Muizenberg, and beyond carried the sound of gunfire and the silence of grief, reminding the city that gang warfare is not contained to one corner but bleeds into every space it touches. The broader landscape shows a system that has survived generation after generation. Entrenched names like the Americans, Hard Living, Sexy Boys, Mongrels, and 28s continue to draw borders across the Cape Flats. Their longevity built on a balance of violence, recruitment, and economic control. Within this architecture, the Fancy Boys' rise is significant not because they displaced the old order, but because they demonstrated how quickly it can be disrupted. Their expansion proved that even a second-order gang dismissed as minor players can withdraw parts of the map if they're willing to move aggressively and treat their soldiers as assets worth investing in. For residents, none of this is an abstract contest. Every shift in territory changes where it is safe to walk. Every expansion campaign translates into more shootings. And every new alliance between rivals tightens the grip of gangsterism on daily life. Families lock themselves indoors before dark. Mothers shepherd their children to school past streets where gunmen test each other's strength. The ordinary rhythms of life are suspended under the weight of a conflict that never rests. The Fancy Boys' ascent does not stand alone. It is both a symptom and a catalyst. A symptom of a system in which governance has failed to offer alternatives, and a catalyst for further instability as rivals are forced to evolve and communities pay the price of adaptation through bloodshed. Their name has become shorthand for disruption, but the violence they embody is not confined to them. It is part of a wider ecosystem of Cape Town gangs where territory is currency, guns are leverage, and human lives are expandable collateral. The story of the Fancy Boys is not only about a gang, it's about a city living under siege, about a fragile order that can collapse with frightening speed, and about the way power reshapes itself on the Cape Flats. As one gang rises, others adjust, and the cycle of violence deepens. For Cape Town, the Fancy Boys mark not the beginning of a new war, but the continuation of one that has never ended. This brings us to the end of our breakdown. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown informative, subscribe and turn on post notifications. Remember, we have more content planned, more cases to unpack, and true crime stories to dive into. So believe me when I tell you, Subscribing to our channel and turning on those post notifications is absolutely necessary. Also, visit our news website www.swisherpost.co.za for the best explainers on every important event happening around you. No agenda, just a story.